Our ancestors had the same eyes, tear ducts, and sadness, but they didn't cry like you did. Studies show they almost certainly never shed a tear. Turns out evolution did something weird on purpose. You have this feature built into your face, salt water, on demand, triggered by a sad song. No other animal on this planet does it quite the way you do. Not chimps, not dolphins, not elephants. So the question is simple. When did we start? Did ancestors 300,000 years ago feel a tear? Let me set the table. Scientists break tears into three kinds, and only one makes us truly human. First, basal tears, the thin film that keeps your eyeball from drying out while you go about life. Second, reflex tears, the flood you get when you chop an onion or something flies into your eye. And then there's the third kind, emotional tears, from grief, joy, or watching a dog reunite with its owner. Only emotional tears are uniquely human. Every mammal has basal and reflex tears, but feeling-driven crying is ours alone. And this matters more than it sounds. Emotional crying is one of the strangest behaviors in the animal kingdom. It's involuntary. It happens in public. It signals weakness. From a survival standpoint, it looks like a bug. So why did evolution keep it? And when did our ancestors first start doing this strange, salty human thing? When I say ancient humans, I mean Homo sapiens, roughly 300,000 years ago, plus Neanderthals and Denisovans. These were real people. They made tools, buried their dead, painted caves. But here's the thing. Tears don't fossilize. That's the whole problem in one sentence. You cannot dig up a tear. You cannot carbon date grief. So when scientists try to pinpoint when humans first cried emotionally, they're detectives at a scene where evidence evaporated. What they can do is study skulls. The tear duct sits in a small hollow near the eye socket, and that hollow does fossilize. Studies show Neanderthal tear ducts were basically identical to ours. Same plumbing. So the hardware was there. But hardware isn't behavior. Your laptop has a webcam. That doesn't mean you're recording. Scientists also look at genes, specific genetic markers linked to tear production and the emotional wiring behind crying. When they compare our genome to a chimpanzee's, something interesting shows up. Chimps have tear ducts too. Chimps get sad. Chimps grieve their dead. But chimps don't weep. They whimper, they scream, they go silent. What they never do is sit down and let salt water run down their face while making eye contact. Which suggests something almost heretical. Emotional crying, it turns out, might not be a purely biological reflex. It might be, at least in part, a learned display. A behavior that fundamentally requires genuine self-awareness. You have to know you're sad. You have to know someone is watching. Wet eyes have to mean something. That's a lot of cognitive machinery for one salty droplet. So when exactly did the first real tear fall? Here's the leading hypothesis. Tears as an honest signal. Imagine you're a small hunter, wounded near the fire, surrounded by your band of maybe 30 people. You need help, food, someone not to kick you out. What you don't need is to look threatening. Tears solve that problem beautifully. They blur your vision. A crying human literally cannot see well enough to fight or hunt. The tear becomes an undeniable message. I am not a threat. I need you. Please stay close. Natural selection favored those who signaled clearly. Because they got help, they actually survived. They had kids. And those kids inherited the same emotional wiring. Evolutionary biologists call this an honest signal, a message hard to fake because it comes with real cost. Fake tears are genuinely hard. Try it right now. Even trained actors need onions or menthol sticks. Real crying is nearly impossible to summon on command, which is exactly why other humans instinctively trust it. If you're crying, something is actually wrong. In a small band, that trust became pure survival currency. A tear said, I am part of this group. I am vulnerable. I am asking you to hold me. And the group, if it worked, held. But one strange problem quietly breaks this tidy story apart. Here's the twist. Infants don't actually cry with tears at first. A newborn baby just screams loudly, piercing, all night. But wet? No. Emotional tears don't show up until somewhere between 2 weeks and 3 months. Real feeling-driven weeping, the kind adults do, often doesn't appear until a child develops a genuine sense of self. That's suspicious. If crying were pure biology, hardwired like breathing or sucking, you'd expect newborns soaked all day. They're not. Which suggests crying isn't just reflex. It's something you learn from your parents, from your culture. You learn what to cry about, when it's acceptable, and who you're allowed to do it around. Studies show cross-cultural crying varies wildly. Some cultures cry openly at everything. Others suppress tears from age 5 onward. If crying were purely genetic, that variation shouldn't exist. But it does. So the behavior keeps getting rewritten. Even if the hardware evolved 100,000 years ago, actual crying gets rewritten every generation since. Look at history. Ancient Spartan warriors were trained to see tears as shameful. A crying man was broken. Roman legionaries followed similar rules. Cry in your tent, never on the field. Samurai codes went further. Now flip it. Across the Mediterranean, Middle East, parts of Asia, professional mourners were hired to wail at funerals. Loud, dramatic, tear-drenched weeping was a job, a skill. You could actually get paid for it, and paid well. The louder you cried at a stranger's funeral, the better you were at your craft. Some traditions survive today. Read Homer. In the Iliad, one of the oldest stories we have, heroes cry constantly. Achilles weeps openly. Odysseus weeps. Grown warriors sob on each other's shoulders after battle, and no one thinks any less of them. Crying wasn't weakness back then. It was proof you felt something real, something worth showing to the world. Fast forward to Victorian England, and men wept openly in public. Letters, diaries, paintings of statesmen bursting into tears. Abraham Lincoln cried in public regularly. Nobody clutched their pearls. It was seen as evidence of a deep soul. Boys Don't Cry is, historically speaking, a blip, maybe 150 years old in the West. It convinced half the population that leaking salt water was somehow undignified. Zoom out, and it looks bizarre. So which version were the first humans? Best guess, based on bones, genes, and comparative primate behavior? Our ancestors did cry, but sparingly, not constantly, not for spilled milk, not for minor everyday frustration. Tears were reserved for the big three: grief when someone died, pain from a serious injury, and reunion. When a member of the band came back after being feared dead. And here's where it gets interesting. Tears probably co-evolved with language and empathy, right around the time our ancestors were developing complex speech. Roughly 100 to 200,000 years ago, they were also developing the ability to model other minds, to imagine what someone else was feeling. And once you can imagine another person's pain, tears become a shortcut. A high-bandwidth message that says, "I see your pain, and I feel it too." No words needed. Humans are what scientists call a super predator. We are the deadliest species this planet has ever produced. We are also, at the same time, the most cooperative. Those two things sound contradictory, but they aren't. We hunt in groups. We raise kids in groups. We survive brutal winters together, always in groups. And the glue holding all those groups together is trust. Constant, reinforced, physical trust between every member. Tears, in this model, are a chemical white flag between allies. When you cry, you hand someone raw vulnerability. Handed to a stranger in the wild, that vulnerability would get you killed with no second chances. But when they respond with comfort instead of exploitation, the bond between the two of you deepens. That is an actual superpower, evolutionarily speaking. The trick that lets small groups take down mammoths together. That's how you build a band that brings down a mammoth and shares the meat fairly around the fire. Which means every one of your tears carries a 100,000-year-old message. Pretty heavy for one drop. Think about that the next time you cry. That salty drop is one of humanity's oldest social technologies. Older than the wheel. Older than agriculture. Older, quite possibly, than fire itself, and definitely older than civilization. Your next cry is a deeply ancient behavior, pulled up from the same well your ancestors once drank from. Picture your great-great-great-grandmother, 1,000 generations back, weeping quietly around a fire in East Africa. Which is why suppressing tears feels weird. You're fighting a hardwired signal 100,000 years old. The lump in your throat when you don't want to cry in a meeting? Evolution and etiquette wrestling live. Your ancestors would honestly find your restraint bizarre. They cried openly, and nobody thought less of them. It also explains something you've probably felt but never really named. Crying alone somehow feels strangely incomplete. There's a hollow quality. You cry, sit there, and something quiet inside you keeps waiting for a response. That's because emotional tears evolved as a social signal, not a private one, meant to be witnessed. When no one is there to see them, half the ancient circuit is left unfinished inside you. Shared weeping still bonds strangers today. Two people crying together at a funeral or a concert, closer than before. That's not sentimentality. That's a 100,000-year-old mechanism firing on schedule. Tears are social technology, just quieter. As real as language, as real as fire. And one weird detail scientists still can't explain. Why salt, specifically? Why does the fluid your eyes leak when you're heartbroken contain salt water plus proteins and hormones? It didn't have to be that way. Evolution could have used pure water, something odorless, or even something invisible. But no, tears are salty. And chemically, they differ across the three types your eyes actually produce. Studies show basal tears, reflex tears, and emotional tears have measurably different compositions, with wildly different chemical makeups. Emotional tears specifically contain higher concentrations of stress hormones, prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and leucine and enkephalin, a natural painkiller. It's as if your body, when you weep from feeling, literally flushes out the chemicals that made you feel bad. Some researchers think crying is a detox function, not just a signal, but a cleanup crew for your bloodstream. That the reason you feel better after a good cry isn't emotional release, it's chemistry. You excreted stress. Other researchers think that's overselling it. Hormone levels are too tiny to matter physically. Calm comes from social support. We don't know yet. It's an open question, which is amazing because we're talking about fluid from your face, something you've made hundreds of times, and science still can't explain why sad tears differ chemically from shampoo tears, which opens a stranger question. If tears are this ancient and loaded, what else are we doing every day? What tiny behaviors, what reflexes, what little rituals of face and voice are messages from ancestors we'll never meet? If you're curious about the small, weird features of being human with a 100,000-year-old backstory, subscribe. I make videos about stuff I find strange, and I'd rather share them with people who feel that too. Next up, we're asking whether ancient humans laughed the way you do, whether cavemen told jokes around the fire, whether a punchline 300,000 years old would still land. Subscribe.